The records of more than 55,000 British convicts who were transported to Australia in the 18th and 19th centuries are going online for the first time via the paid-for website ancestry.co.uk. The new records detail the convicts who were transported to Australia and either pardoned for the crimes or served out their sentences. Access to the convict records will be free from the 24th until the 30th of January this year. Now I'm joined by Frank Bongiorno, who is a senior lecturer in Australian history at King's College London. Thank you very much for talking to us this morning. Can we be clear, first of all, the numbers of convicts? I think we mentioned it there. What sort of period were people sent to Australia, and for what sort of crimes?
Convicts were sent to Australia between 1788 and 1867. They were sent to different parts of Australia at different times. Eastern Australian transportation ended in the early 1850s, Western Australia in the late 1860s. Most of the crimes committed were property crimes of one form or another. In other words, most of the convicts were in fact thieves. There was an old romantic idea, I guess, that convicts were very much victims and all were sent for trivial offences. Most were, you wouldn't say hardened criminals, but certainly probably repeat offenders, we'd say today. So, yeah, I mean, basically workers who stole is this expression that's often being used. I mean, they're working class people, and in that sense, I think are very ordinary, and the records that are released will, I think, reveal people who are ordinary working class people, but with that difference perhaps from others that they stole and were caught stealing.
How was it that that convict population sort of really populated Australia? Because presumably conditions were pretty awful. A lot probably didn't survive all that long, and also they had to meet up and have families and so on. How did it develop from the convict side of things?
Well, about 160,000 convicts went out, and they were supplemented, of course, by free settlers right from the beginning. I mean, they had to be guards if they were convicts, and free settlers went out to Australia in increasingly large numbers from the 1820s. But yeah, I mean, they did survive. In fact, the survival rates on ships, for example, were very high. Death rates were less than 2% across the period. It's an era in which there were major improvements in transportation, major improvements in health. The contractors who organised the shipping of the convicts were paid for live convicts. In other words, they were penalised if convicts arrived extremely unhealthy or if convicts died along the way. So there were very strong incentives to get convicts to Australia safely. And although there were some horror ships in the early days, in the 1790s, for example, it did become increasingly safe. And convicts reproduced with free settlers, convicts reproduced with one another. It was a predominantly male population, and that was a major panic or cause of panic and concern in Australia, of course. It led to fears, for example, of homosexuality, amongst other things, but of sexual disorders more generally. But eventually numbers balanced out too.
And how much of the present Australian population can sort of trace its roots back to the convict times, and great fascination in all that now?
There is a great fascination. I mean, convicts were once a source of shame for Australia. The convict origins were referred to as the convict taint, and I think when ideas of breeding and a kind of the family name were very important, a convict relative in Australia was seen as a kind of skeleton in the closet. But certainly from about the 1960s onwards, there's been great pride amongst family historians if they find a convict relative. If they find a convict relative who was in the First Fleet or the Second Fleet, the very early ones, this is, it marks your family, I guess, as pioneering. And I think similar things are probably happening in Britain too. Clearly many British people would have convict relatives, and when they search their family histories, do find a convict relative in the past.
It's interesting, as you say, isn't it? Once upon a time people wanted to be thought they descended from sort of aristocrats, but now we're rather keen to find humble origins, or as you say, even people who've done naughty things.
Yes, I guess it's a sign of more democratic times, really, and a jolly good thing for that. Because it was, I mean, there's a classic case in Australia when New South Wales had its 150th celebrations in 1938. They had a reenactment of the arrival of the First Fleet with one thing missing: there were no convicts. So everyone else that might have been there was commemorated, but not the convicts. But that has certainly changed now.
Here we're just looking a bit at the website we were mentioning there, where you can trace all sorts of people, and this is the one where Australian, particularly those interested in their Australian ancestry, can go and have a look. Now let's move on just to the sort of present day. Prince William has been visiting Australia in the last few days, very much so often a subject of controversy about the Queen. Should she go on being the head of state and all that sort of thing? How do you view sort of modern Australians' attitude to all that sort of thing?
To republicanism and the monarchy? Yeah, look, I don't think there's enormous enthusiasm for monarchy in Australia. I mean, there's generally been at least slight majorities for republic all the way through. Australians voted on it in 1999, but it was defeated, largely, I think, on account of the particular model that was on offer, which wasn't favourable to a majority. It's often said in Australia that I think while the present Queen remains the monarch, a republic's unlikely, but certainly the issue has been revived with a new government in the last couple of years. And but yes, I mean, the Prince has clearly been welcomed in Australia with great enthusiasm, and I don't know if that has any long-term effects. I think probably once the tour is over, people will go back to their normal opinions and views.
Well, one thing's for certain, I don't think William has convicts in his ancestry, as far as one's aware.
Not Australian ones.
Depends how far back you go.
That's true. Perhaps not Australian ones, yes.
Frank Beyond-Turner, we're very grateful to you. Thank you very much indeed.
It's been a pleasure.